Alaska. Just the name conjures up images of rugged mountains, deep blue seas, trees as far as the eye can see, and wildlife beyond imagination. Alaska. We've come in search of experiences that we couldn't hope to have in any other part of the world. As our expedition begins, we have our eyes set on the horizon, looking for all things unexpected, hidden among our everyday world and lives. From our ship or land, around every corner, discovery is waiting for us. With our dedicated team of naturalists, holding the door open to this great land, we prepare ourselves for sights and sounds that could only exist in a place as wild as the great frontier known simply as Alaska. The Tlingit Indian word Sitka is a rough translation meaning by the sea, and here we begin our expedition into this great land. Sitka, the oldest non-native settlement in southeastern Alaska, was first settled by Russian explorers in 1799 as they looked to exploit the natural bounty of this great land. Located on Baranof Island, in a sheltered bay just off the Pacific Ocean, Sitka was home to gold miners in the late 1800s. Shortly after the gold ran out, the whaling industry was located here. This last great frontier is our own gem for the next week, to be experienced in a way only possible from a ship as nimble and capable as ours. Welcome aboard the Sea Lion, our floating home for the next week.
Welcome aboard. Alexandra, welcome aboard. I'm Captain Martin.
Hello, Captain. How are you?
I'm doing very good. How are you, young lady?
Hello, Alex.
Nice to meet you, Alex.
After we board, Captain Martin treats us to a champagne reception where we get a chance to relax and meet our fellow travelers. Just before dinner, and as the sun sets slowly in the west, our crew makes ready and we set sail in search of the excitement that we will have, exploring Alaska's coastal wilderness. As we wake on our first day at sea, we find ourselves on the glassy smooth waters of Saginaw Bay in search of black bears. Much to our delight and wonder, we find more bears in one place than any of our naturalists have ever seen in one location. It's said in Alaska that when the tide is out, the table is set. Here we see bears snagging salmon out of the water. Usually, these are very solitary animals, but with the amount of easy food available, they're peacefully coexisting on the shore together. On our way back down the bay, we have our first encounter with the massive humpback whales when we spot a cow-calf pair slowly lunge feeding on the surface. The behavior these two are displaying tells us their food is on the surface, as we can see them opening their mouths and gulping vast amounts of water every time they surface. These humpbacks come north from Hawaii every summer to feed in the rich Alaskan waters. The whale's primary diet consists of herring and krill, which they eat by the ton daily. After spending the summer feeding, they make the long voyage back to the warm Hawaiian waters, where they spend the winter mating. During this time, the whales won't feed, so it's important that they maximize all their time here in Alaska. When we reach the mouth of Saginaw Bay, we have the most glorious kayak experience, where we paddle the tranquil waters, escaping the rush of the cities and jobs we left behind. The kayak is an inherently Alaskan boat, having been modeled after the Aleut Bidarka. When the first Russian traders came here, they recognized the beauty and strength of these original Alaskan boats. The original Bidarka was made from alder and seal skins, and was custom built to perfectly match its owner's hands, arms, and fingers. To make sure that their boats would be strong and powerful for the hunting that the Aleuts did, they built them following traditions and customs that were handed down from generation to generation, father to son, mother to daughter. The entire community was involved in building each of these custom boats, and they were outfitted with all the necessary gear to hunt a wide variety of prey the Native Americans needed to survive. While some of us were kayaking, others went for a walk along the intertidal zone at the base of towering bluffs. Here, we marveled at the hidden life amongst the rocks. As we returned to the Sea Lion, we sampled some of the Pacific Northwest's finest wines and regional foods.
Can I make a suggestion, or you just want to try one of each and see which one you like?
While we were sampling these foods, the whales we came to see were sampling their own. At this time of the day, the light level goes down and the herring come to the surface, and we're delighted to see the humpback whales surrounding the ship in every direction we look. This evening, we again see lunge feeding, in addition to a very remarkable behavior called bubble net feeding. With this technique, the whales dive below the surface and below a ring of bubbles that they use to disorient and trap entire schools of fish. As the bubbles rise to the surface, the humpbacks come up from below and swallow swimming pool-sized mouthfuls of dinner. As evening turned to night, we were treated to even more spectacular whale behavior, as we saw one in the distance tail lobbing. No one knows why whales do this, but it was our pleasure to experience nature on such a personal level. At daybreak, we're headed up LeConte Bay to the Tidewater Glacier that bears the same name. Here we find soaring rock walls, scoured smooth by eons of glacial activity. Captain Martin navigates us past the icebergs that stretch as far as the eye can see and up to the glacier. This Tidewater Glacier begins many miles up in the mountains as the Stikine ice field. As snow falls and accumulates in the high country, it turns to ice under the weight of the snow that never melts. As the ice accumulates, it starts to move downhill as one large, flexible form. It's this motion, combined with the rocks that are frozen into the ice, that carve out the majestic fjord that we're traveling today. As the glacier reaches the ocean and its terminal moraine, large chunks calve off to form the icebergs that we've been sailing past all morning. As we reach the toe of the LeConte Glacier, we're hit in the face by the katabatic wind that is driven down the length of the glacier. As we enjoy the spectacular sunrise in the deep blue Alaskan sky, we witness the birth of an iceberg as tons of ice crash into the ocean.
Well, here comes the big one. Long cannonball. Here goes. Big cannonball.
This calving was so massive that the sea lion was significantly rocked by a wave created by the falling ice. Later this morning, we launch our Zodiacs for up-close tours of the icebergs that have recently calved from the LeConte Glacier and fill this picturesque bay. Here we see crystal-clear ice that could be nearly 500 years old. As we explore these giant bergs, we're consistently reminded of the power that is necessary to shape our Earth. The intense shades of blue we see are created by the densest ice from the bottom of the glacier. This ice absorbs the longer, low-energy wavelengths of the reds and the oranges, leaving nothing but the blue to escape. After spending the morning in this forbidding frozen landscape, we go on to the fishing village of Petersburg. Located on the Wrangell Narrows due to the great fishing and ice, Petersburg is one of Alaska's most successful and wealthiest communities. While some of us choose to go flight seeing over the LeConte Glacier on float planes, others opt for the once-in-a-lifetime experience of taking a helicopter to the top of Alaska and the Patterson Glacier. In Petersburg, we have the opportunity to go for a hike up a boardwalk and through a muskeg bog. Muskegs are defined as a bog with very stunted trees. This bog is created when an impervious layer keeps groundwater from seeping down and pools up on the surface. Though we see greenery all around us, we are in a very dry, nutrient-deficient environment where all the plant life fights to gain a hold.
Called a sundew. Insect lands on that sucker, can't get off. The plant digests the insect. Bogs are famous for having insectivorous plants.
Today we're in search of bears. We make our way to Pavlov Harbor on Chichagof Island, which is one of the largest islands in the Alexander Archipelago. After we land, we head across the intertidal zone in small groups. At the shore, we see the progression of forest as it matures centuries after the Little Ice Age. We see grasses giving way to the quick-growing alder, with the western hemlock and the massive Sitka spruce comprising the majority of the forest in southeastern Alaska. As we move up the shore, we come to a small river that many of our fellow expeditioners have paddled their kayaks up. Just up the river, we find a small waterfall and fish ladder with a large quiet pool at the base that is full of jumping salmon instinctually trying to make their way back to their spawning grounds. During the spawning season, bears come right down to the water and gorge on salmon every summer. This fatty food is a perfect diet for the bears, as they will go into hibernation soon and will need all the reserves they can get for their long winter slumber. As we quietly watch, we discover the brown bears that we've come in search of. With wonder, we watch a sow or mother bear come out of the woods and down to the water to teach her two cubs how to snag salmon. After the sow catches a salmon, she lets her cubs have it as she looks for another. As we watch, we see one of the cubs catch what may very well be its first fish. These brown bears can grow to weigh between 500 and 1,000 pounds over their estimated 15-year lifespan. To find all the food they need, their range is anywhere from 70 to 1,000 square miles, and they're excellent swimmers. The brown bear can be distinguished from black bears by the muscular hump on their shoulders. After we watch these brown bears, we enjoy a splendid lunch on the sun deck of the Sea Lion while we're still at anchor in Pavlov Harbor. This afternoon, we head back up Chatham Strait in search of more bubblenet feeding humpbacks. After scouting the area around Ayukeen Bay, we are not disappointed to find a group of 3 humpbacks prowling for herring in about 180 feet of water. As these whales begin to sing and find food, their group grows with the addition of a number of interlopers that join them in this remarkable behavior. We have the great fortune to see this group working cooperatively as each humpback has their own place in the hierarchy of the feeding group. We see these whales following the same pattern every time as they come to the surface, with each whale in the same order and relative location to each other as they have been all afternoon. After the whales blow their bubble net, they use the white underside of their pectoral fins and flukes to force their prey into even tighter grouping to aid in their lunge feeding. At the end of the day, we realize that we've had an incredible up-close experience with some of nature's greatest creatures in a way that most people on our planet can only dream about. "200 years is the blink of an eye in geological time. But if we were to have been traveling with Captain George Vancouver in 1794 as his expedition passed what is now known as Glacier Bay, we would have seen a much different landscape than the one we're traveling in today. Just that short time ago, all of Glacier Bay National Park was covered in a sheet of ice, 65 miles long and 300 feet thick. Now, just 200 years later, the ice is melted and we find some of the most dramatic scenery in North America. After sailing all night, we wake at the toe of the Grand Pacific and Margerie glaciers. When Vancouver came through this area, the Grand Pacific filled the entire bay we'll spend the day traversing. The Grand Pacific Glacier is no longer considered a tidewater glacier because it's retreated onto land and is no longer calving. By contrast, the Margerie Glacier is one of the most active glaciers in the park. At the toe of the Margerie, we're face to face with a glacier that is 1 mile wide and 300 feet tall. We watch, we're stunned by the power we see in this frozen land. We experience a large calving event when a wall of ice the height of a 50-story building is sent crashing into the sea with a thunderous roar. After we leave the Margerie Glacier, we sail on to the Johns Hopkins Glacier. In this inlet, we see hundreds of harbor seals hauled out on the ice molting. During the late spring and early summer, this inlet is a favorite place for these seals to pup their young. The reason the ice of this glacier is full of rocks and debris is due to the marginal moraines of two glaciers meeting higher up and pulling the debris down to the toe of the glacier. While here at the Johns Hopkins, we get to see a remarkable calving event referred to as a shooter. This is when a large piece of ice breaks off the base of the glacier and shoots to the surface.
Like a whale. You know, we're going to feel that, guys. Yeah, we are. Right there. It looks like a whale. Wow. Oh, wow. A major eruption. Oh, wow.
Here, we're awed when two massive pieces of ice come up from the depths and roll over right in front of us. As we head back down Glacier Bay, we make a stop at the South Marble Islands for a good look at the namesake of the ship we're traveling on. Much to our delight, we find a large group of young sea lions hauled out on the rocks, playing and sunning themselves. These small islands also play host to a wide variety of seabirds, including everyone's favorite, the tufted puffin. As our day ends and dusk falls, we make dock in Bartlett Cove at the headquarters of the park. At daybreak, we find our picture-perfect Alaskan skies clouding up, and we wonder if the old sailor's adage, "Red sky at morning, sailor take warning," is true. On our last opportunity to paddle in Alaska, we land on one of the Shaw Islands for a circumnavigation here at Fox Creek. Some of us are now old hands in our kayaks. For others, it's the first time to ever paddle. With a bit of instruction, we're all quickly proficient and we head out on the serene waters of Idaho Inlet as we get drenched in the Alaskan sunshine. This area was first visited by Russian hunters in search of sea otters, which they referred to as soft gold, and hunted to near extinction for their fur. As we paddle, our thoughts are on what it must have been like to live as an early Native American in this area, subsisting on what we could have caught from our boat in these rich waters. In the afternoon, we go ashore in the tiny fishing village of Elfin Cove on Chichagof Island. With no roads and only boardwalks, the only way to reach this remote outpost is by boat or float plane. We drop the hook and board our Zodiacs for the quick trip into town, where we find a sizable fleet of fishing boats on the dock. These boats have made port to wait out an approaching storm on the Pacific Ocean. Here, the fisherwomen and men take all 5 species of salmon, as well as cod, halibut, and crab. Water is so central to this village that kids growing up learn how to pilot a boat before they learn how to ride a bike. Last winter, there were only 12 full-time residents here. During that time, the dogs of Elfin Cove outnumbered the humans nearly 2 to 1. This village is so remote, the local electricity source is a large diesel generator, and all phone calls are relayed by microwave to the mainland. As we walk around this quaint, rustic village, we're struck by the beauty and tranquility of this sheltered harbor. As we leave Elfin Cove in the rain, we have the perfect end to our day as we discover a number of humpback whales and sea lions playing in the water right in front of us. Stunning is not nearly enough of an adjective to describe Tracy Arm. This 25-mile-long fjord is among Alaska's most picturesque locations. The Tracy Arm is so remote that the sea lion has lost all radio and satellite contact with the outside world. As we slowly make our way through the ice that has calved from the Sawyer and South Sawyer glaciers, we travel through towering rock walls and past numerous waterfalls that continue to eat away at the landscape just as they've done for the last 1,000 years. As we sail up this glacially carved valley, we see a landscape that is nearly completely devoid of trees, attesting to just how recently these glaciers have receded up the fjord. In this very narrow fjord, we see hanging U-shaped valleys that were carved by tributary glaciers that have melted long ago. With mists hugging the rock walls, we feel as though we've been transported to Middle Earth. With the fjord filled with so much ice, the sea lion is not able to make it to the toe of the glacier, so we launch our nimble and capable Zodiacs for the last push through the ice up to the Sawyer Glacier. From the Zodiac, we're offered one of the most unique views of the Alaskan landscape. The ice that creates these glaciers comes from the massive Stikine icefield that feeds the LeConte Glacier that we visited earlier in our expedition. After a chilly, wet Zodiac ride, we know that we've experienced the true raw nature of Alaska at its best. As we sail back down the Tracy Arm, we slowly make our way through the ever-shifting ice, navigating carefully as the tide and currents pack the ice field that we've been traveling through all day. Our time exploring Alaska's coastal wilderness has been filled with sights and sounds we could hardly imagine a week ago.
I love Alaska for a lot of reasons. To me, it really is a place of superlatives. You've got these incredible icebergs floating down these steep-walled fjords fed by immense glaciers. There are these huge humpback whales. And this narrow strip of coastline is part of the largest intact temperate rainforest in the world. And it's just such an incredible place to see so many different things. It's always changing, it's wild, and it's a way to get away from all the crazy things that are going on back home. It's a real escape and a fabulous opportunity to see some amazing wildlife too.
Here, we've seen the eons-old processes in action that continue to shape our planet.
Oh, here it comes. Big one. Long kind of club. Here it goes. Big
Alaska is so absolutely pristine. We all come from cities and towns with varying degrees of stress and pollution and so on, but up here the country has evolved since the glaciers have left with very light touch of humans, and so we can relate to the natural environment, which I think, speaking personally, sustains me for dealing with the stress back home. This is my cornerstone for relating everything else, the beautiful balance within nature, which back home often we see the dysfunction of society, and we try to improve that, but it's the nature that keeps me going. And we have to maintain these sorts of environment for the future so that other people can be nourished and sustained by them.
We've seen soaring mountains rising from the ocean bottom to tower thousands of feet above our heads.
Alaska is really special because of the wildness here. It's not just the wildness of the forest scenes and the spectacular mountains and the glaciers calving and all of that, but there's these incredible scenes of animals, scenes you wouldn't find anywhere else. Here they're not so bothered by man. They're not being forced back in some corner. They're free to roam around. And in a quiet ship that's maneuverable, we can move right in and watch bears walk along coastlines. This is a very, very wild place.
As we leave Alaska, we take nothing but photographs and memories that will last a lifetime. As good stewards of the planet we live on, we leave nothing but our ephemeral wake to be consumed by the wind and tides, and footprints that will disappear with the rain that gives life to all living things that we've seen and experienced during our Alaskan expedition.
I'm often reminded of a quote from John Muir, where he said that the world, though made, is yet being made. And I don't think that there's anywhere on Earth that that's more evident than here in Southeast Alaska. The glaciers are continually carving out new terrain, and I think it's an invaluable lesson for anybody to come up here and get to really feel themselves to be part of their surroundings.
Our hope for the future is that this great land will remain untouched so that our descendants and theirs can come back here for generations to come and experience the same grandeur we have this week.